coffee time. An informal session where I go over some of the issues that have come across my desk since the last time we got together, which was Tuesday at this point. I see some of the regulars, of course, Michael Keller, Dermatology, and others already commenting in the comments. Great to see you guys back again. I certainly have a special show for you today. We've got both Tom Golden and Paul Elam coming on in 30 minutes to discuss issues around YouTube and Vimeo and Paul's decision to abandon YouTube. So we'll get to that very shortly. In the meantime, first of all, as usual, I'd like to draw your attention to my VIP club membership in the patriarchy, which makes me qualified to comment on all the carryings on and goings on and comings and goings of the global evil feminist empire. And with no further ado, I'm going to get right to the material because there is a lot of it. And I want us to have a backdrop against which to talk about the serious issue of YouTube's and Vimeo's behavior and the encroaching censorship that's going on in our society, both as a result of and as an excuse of this coronavirus and more. First of all, I'll start with a couple of quick memes here. Thank you, Michael, for your regular reminder. Yes, help Steve stay caffeinated. Hit the like, share the video, and consider donating to Studio Burley. Thank you very much, Michael. Here we have a reminder, the danger. You are being conditioned to view your freedom as selfish. Absolutely. I'm going to just expand this a little bit and carry on with a couple of memes here. This meme, this is, of course, what is going on today. The message that is coming at us from every quarter today around this quarantine. And the constant message is obey, obey, obey. We'll have something to say about that shortly. And another reminder here, you see all these links will be in the description of the video, but let's read this title from the top. Don't let leaders use the coronavirus as an excuse to violate civil liberties. This was printed on April 13th, about 3-4 weeks ago. So keep that in mind. Now, the first thing we're going to get at is some background around the SPLC and its overreaching its authority or its even legitimacy for calling groups hate groups. And A Voice for Men was put on this list. I don't know if Paul Elam specifically was, but I believe A Voice for Men was put on the list. And we're going to have a little look at what the SPLC quickly is. But reading this from vice.com from the top, the heinous acts that earned male supremacists their hate group designation. And this is from February 2 years ago on the Southern Poverty Law Center website. I'll pause here to recognize Oki Migtau for his generous donation to Studio Brule. Oki says, then I am selfish, so be it. Okay, I suspect that's a response to one of the other comments in the stream here. Let's look at a couple of quotes from this article from Vice, reading from the top. For the first time ever, 2 male supremacy groups have been officially categorized as hate groups, A Voice for Men and Return of Kings, both of which will bill themselves as men's rights organizations, which have been included in the SPLC's 2017 Year in Hate report. Carrying on. Both of these organizations actively malign women, says the SPLC. You see statements of genetic inferiority about how all women are manipulative, stupid, and so on and so forth. Don't need to read the rest of that. Most of you folks are familiar with this turn of events at SPLC, and this was repeated in different organizations like Elle magazine here. Male supremacy groups are officially considered hate groups. And then from this article in Elle magazine, male supremacy is a hateful ideology advocating for the subjugation of women. It misrepresents women, all women, as genetically inferior, manipulative and stupid, and reduces them to the reproductive or sexual function, with sex being something they allow men to do. Now, you can certainly read this in the quotes, in the links in the description. I think I'll skip forward rather quickly today because we do have a lot of material as a backdrop to this discussion with Paul and Tom. Read this quote from the top. One of the new groups added to the hate list is A Voice for Men, which has called for October to be named Bash a Violent Bitch Month. The second organization, Return of Kings, was founded by pickup artist Velocide. I don't know how to pronounce that article. Who has advocated for the legislation of various different other problems. You're familiar with the Return of Kings as well. And here, from Reason.com. What about the SPLC? It turns out the Southern Poverty Law Center is both a terrible place to work and a place that does terrible work. Let's read a quote from that article. The leadership shakeup, they fired top 3 guys at SPLC not long ago, fueled by allegations that black staffers were shut out of key positions and all that D's personally harassed female staffers. D was the founder of the SPLC, has brought SPLC considerable media scrutiny, and it's about time. Regardless of whether these specific accusations have merit, the SPLC should face a reckoning over its extremely shoddy work, which has mistakenly promoted the idea that fringe hate groups are a rising threat. Now, this is quite significant to the SPLC as well. Peddling this false narrative has long been SPLC's business model, and the Trump years have been especially profitable, since the group was almost perfectly positioned to capitalize on growing liberal fears about hate crimes, resurgent white nationalism, and the alt-right. Over the course of the Trump campaign and presidency, the SPLC has added dozens of staffers, saw its social media following rise dramatically, ramped up its fundraising, and built a $200 million endowment. Its role has been to provide intellectual support for a central narrative of the hashtag resistance. Hate, broadly defined, is surging across America, and Trump is to blame. Reading this quote, sloppily tallying hate in service of a greater narrative is par for the course at SPLC. This, again, was on Reason.com. And when it comes to misleading hate crime data, the SPLC is far from the only offender. But still, the SPLC stands out. It previously characterized Maajid Nawaz as an anti-Muslim extremist, but Nawaz is a progressive whose work is aimed at de-radicalizing Muslim extremists. To this day, the SPLC lists Charles Murray's ideology as white nationalist. And this is the backdrop against which Paul Elam's group, A Voice for Men, has been also characterized as a hate group when we know full well that it is nothing of the sort. Here's Charles Murray, who is characterized as a white nationalist. He's an American political scientist, sociologist, and writer. He is a scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, which is a conservative think tank. And this falls in line 100% with the radical feminist nature of the SPLC. The SPLC is a left-wing feminist organization, and they're using their platform and image of a anti-hate organization to smear their political enemies. That is all they do. Let's read this article. The title here, The Southern Poverty Law Center is everything that's wrong with liberalism. Absolutely. Again, these links are in the description. Deploring bigotry while engaging in it. In a recent expose at his time at the SPLC, Bob Moser explains how strange it felt to arrive at a civil rights organization and notice a sharp internal racial hierarchy. And here another article on the same organization. The Southern Poverty Law Center is a hate-based scam that nearly caused me to be murdered. And this was printed in 2019, about 6 months ago in August. Have a read of that one. And in the meantime, we'll move on to another organization, article on the SPLC. This one from USA Today. The Southern Poverty Law Center is a hate-based scam that nearly, oh, that's the same one. Sorry. There, you find that on USA Today. Well worth reading some of these articles if you're interested in what the SPLC is really all about. Reading this quote from the article, for years, former employees revealed, local journalists reported, and commentators have lamented, the Southern Poverty Law Center is not what it claims to be. Not a pure-hearted, clear-headed legal advocate for the vulnerable, but rather an obscenely wealthy marketing scheme. For years, the left-wing interest group has used its hate group list to promote the fiction that violent neo-Nazis and Christian nonprofits peacefully promoting orthodox beliefs about marriage and sex are indistinguishable. Sometimes it has apologized to public figures, it has smeared, and it has recently paid out millions to settle a threatened defamation suit. I'll pause here to acknowledge Harry Holbrook. Thank you very much, Harry, for your generous donation to Studio Brûlé. We very much appreciate it and need all our donations and support here. And Harry says, proud to be a toxic male. Death to feminism and its propaganda. Men are good. Snowflakes melt in the light of truth. Well said, Harry. And reading on from that same article, the criticism comes from many corners. There's the current affairs editor who seems sympathetic at the center's progressive mission, but decries its hate group list as an outright fraud and a willful deception designed to scare older liberals into writing checks to the SPLC. This now has been investigated and reported on quite a lot. So you can see all those articles in the description links. Here's another one from Melanie Phillips. Anti-hate groups have become the real voices of hate. He states this quite strongly last year in April. Reading from the top, the Southern Poverty Law Center in Alabama started life in the 1970s fighting the Ku Klux Klan, but has since grown into an organization that attacks anyone it judges guilty of promoting hate. Its influence is huge. With the media lapping up its denunciations of groups and individuals deemed to be beyond the progressive pale, its targets have been turned into pariahs and cast into professional and social exile. And this we are seeing they're trying to do with Paul Elam as well, and the Voice for Men and a number of other organizations who dare to threaten and reveal the truth about the feminist narrative in our culture and other issues of power and discrimination in our culture. And here, as an example of how far they will go, SPLC actually targets feminist scholars Christina Hoff Sommers. Christina is a bit of a controversial person within, both within and outside of the men's rights movement. But I have never seen anything from Christina that could remotely be judged to bring her under attack of an organization like the SPLC in its present presentation of how it pretends to be standing up against hatred. Let's read this quote from the article. The Southern Poverty Law Center is at it again in a report on male supremacy, an ideology that the group says advocates for the subjugation of women. It included American Enterprise Institute scholar Christina Hoff Sommers, calling her someone who gives mainstream and respectable face to some men's rights activist concerns. Sommers told the Weekly Standard that she finds her inclusion in this report quite surprising. I guess I shouldn't be terribly, terribly surprised, because Christina Hoff Sommers calls herself a feminist, but isn't feminist enough for the SPLC. Now let's move on to another topic here and getting directly to the YouTube situation. YouTube's censorship of dissenting doctors will backfire, claims Fee. Sheltering the public from ideas, even bad ones, only weakens society's immunity against error. Not terror, but error. And this is a really good point. It's worth reading this article. And it pertains to, and we'll get into the discussion as to why Paul Elam has decided to leave YouTube. Reading this article from the top, this quote, YouTube has been removing videos of a press briefing in which two doctors criticized the sweeping shelter-at-home edicts that governments have imposed throughout the world in response to the COVID-19 outbreak. One of the videos had over 5 million views before it was taken down. This was the one where the doctors claimed that, sheltering at home was not. And we went over this a couple of days ago. But let's continue on reading from the top here. Whatever the veracity of the doctor's claims, YouTube's censorship of unorthodox ideas in the name of protecting the public from misinformation is misguided and counterproductive. Sheltering the public from ideas, even bad ones, only makes society more susceptible to dangerous errors. And we saw how the WHO was culpable in promoting and spreading dangerous errors around the coronavirus, in the early days especially. Reading from the top, just as local health authorities are ostensibly trying to protect the public from COVID-19 through shelter-at-home policies, YouTube is seeking to shelter the public from, quote, misinformation. Indeed. And this article, reading the headline here, YouTube removing content that goes against World Health Organization recommendations, the CEO says. I think we talked about this earlier, but it bears repeating as we're discussing YouTube, and we'll be discussing Vimeo as well. Reading from the top here, YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki appeared on CNN's far-left reliable sources on Sunday to discuss what the platform is doing to combat misinformation during the coronavirus pandemic. Wojcicki said YouTube would remove any videos that provide problematic information related to COVID-19. And this has been a theme right around the world. In our own country, in Canada, I should say, a lot of Americans are here, but I'm from Canada. Our Prime Minister, Child Emperor Trudeau, has been working out ways and has his team working on how to repress, suppress, eliminate so-called misinformation as well, while they are endorsing China and WHO as reliable sources. Reading from the top. President Trump announced recently the U.S. would halt funding of the World Health Organization over its handling of the coronavirus, and rightly so. But that hasn't stopped YouTube from taking the agency's recommendations as gospel. So they're clearly putting themselves in the position of deciding who is telling the truth and who is not, and that makes them the purveyors of propaganda. Reading from the top, YouTube appeared on, the CEO appeared on CNN's, oh, I read that already, didn't I? Yeah, problematic. I must have grabbed that twice. Here, she was quoted as saying, anything that would go against World Health Organization recommendations would be a violation of our policy. Okay, well, let's look at what the World Health Organization has been doing. And this is the Wall Street Journal's article on the World Health Organization's disinformation. We just saw that CEO of YouTube indicates that they will own, that you cannot contradict the World Health Organization. But here, the Wall Street Journal is reporting the WHO's bows to Beijing have harmed the global response to the pandemic. Reading a quote from the article. The coronavirus pandemic will offer many lessons in what to do better to save more lives and do less economic harm the next time. But there's already one way to ensure future pandemics are less deadly. Reform or defund the World Health Organization. Well, so the World Health Organization, the only trusted source for YouTube, is being called out by none other than the Wall Street Journal as a purveyor of misinformation. We need to look into why this is going on. What do organizations like YouTube, Facebook, Vimeo, for example, as well, Twitter, what do they have to gain by backing up the World Health Organization and suppressing criticism of the World Health Organization. That's a story for another video, but it's well worth investigating. Business Insider says, Trump is right about one thing. The World Health Organization deserves some blame for the coronavirus pandemic. And here, a quote from the article, WHO chose politics over truth, and the world suffers as a result. On the subject of taking responsibility, Dr. Tedros Adhanom, I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name, WHO's Director General has some explaining to do. Indeed, he does. Tedros, China's preferred nominee to lead the organization, had previously overseen Ethiopia's healthcare system at a time when it was thought to be covering up 3 separate cholera epidemics. Now on his watch, he's allowed WHO to uncritically repeat the Chinese government's unreliable reporting. And yet YouTube sees fit to use the WHO as the only source of reliable information related to the coronavirus. The WHO, who has been deliberately deceitful about this. So let's go on to the next section here. And here, censorship during the pandemic creates new backlash against Facebook and YouTube. YouTube and Vimeo have removed video touting potential experimental UV light treatment after President Trump mused aloud about a similar method to fight COVID-19. So Vimeo is on the game here too, and I think Elam has a thing or two to say about his experiences with Vimeo shortly as well. These things are going on across all of these left-wing dominated and left-wing run media organizations. That article is by Christian Toto. Again, it's in the links in the description. And let's read this quote from the top. Video sharing site Vimeo has also removed the video, reports PJ Matt Margolis. These are hardly the only cases of big tech platforms working overtime to shape what we see and hear online, from absurd health claims to more worrisomely protesters eager to have their views heard. Conservatives are particularly sensitive to the trend, following aggressive tactics to quiet their voices in the digital space. Long before the pandemic, Twitter routinely punished conservatives like actor James Wood, who said it ran afoul of the platform's policies. This is a giant theme here carrying out, and the coronavirus is an excuse to push it deeper and deeper. At YouTube, at Vimeo, at Twitter, at Facebook, and the list goes on. What they all have in common is a shared left-wing viewpoint and an enemy to attack in the conservative viewpoint. And SPLC is fully on board with that as well. Reading from the top, David Keating, president of the DC-based Institute for Free Speech, says blindly supporting government dictums can do a disservice to the public at large. To this day, in the UK, the official guidance is not to wear a mask to prevent coronavirus transmission, Keating says. Citing Taiwan's more successful pandemic fight, credited in part by mask use. Basically, the government is lying to people. They don't want them buying medical-grade masks. That was the original motive behind telling people that you should not wear a mask. And yet they want us to trust the WHO and the government as your only source of information. Here is an example of a film that was kicked off of YouTube because they questioned the WHO. This documentary is now extremely popular on Amazon Play and a number of other sources. I have the links in the description here. But this is a message. I'm not going to read it all out to you here, but it's another example of the censorship that seems to be concerted, coordinated around these organizations. And this Trust Who, this is the Twitter or Facebook page of the documentary makers, Trust Who. For anyone still interested in watching our response to Vimeo removing our Trust Who documentary from their platform, here is the correct YouTube link that works. In this case, Vimeo censored, kicked their documentary off for criticizing the WHO, and YouTube left it on, and it's also still available on Amazon's version of the video streaming. I can't remember the name of it, but the Amazon's version, but its link is in the description. Here, Vimeo bans documentary exposing Big Pharma's influence within the World Health Organization. This is a second documentary. I don't think this refers to the same one, but it's a second one. So there we have many examples of deliberately withholding important, pertinent, verifiable information, kicking it off these websites in order to maintain a narrative that the left-wing organizations want you to see. And that is what we call censorship. It is opinion manipulation, it is manipulation of the public. Here from Wired, no one's happy with the YouTube's content moderation policies. YouTube faces dueling lawsuits from a conservative group and an LGBTQ group, both of which argue the website discriminates against them. You viewers here will know that I argue for let it all be published, and we can sort it out ourselves. We're not dummies. But here, this Reuters reports in February just this year, Google defeats the conservative group's YouTube censorship appeal. So Google has won, and technically under the law, they are right. But one of the issues about these free speech laws is that they were written long before these social media platforms became essentially the public square. And so the public square today, where most people gather in great numbers to communicate with one another, these have become these social media groups. So as I've remarked on in the past, I'm in favor of declaring these things public square space for freedom of speech, because that is what they've become. At the times of free speech laws, we didn't foresee this issue coming up in our culture. Here a quote from that article. In a 3-0 decision that could apply to platforms such as Facebook, the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Seattle found that YouTube was not a public forum subject to First Amendment scrutiny by judges. And I'm sure that is exactly the letter of the law, but those laws, in my opinion, were written in a time where we weren't facing an online public square like we are today. Okay, this again is the crux of the matter and the quarantine and the crux of the matter for the coronavirus. The message we are getting day in and day out is obey, obey, obey. And that is the essentially tyranny. And here at Cato Institute's article, and this will be the last one last topic we'll go through before we get Paul and Tom on. Tyranny and Free Speech, written in 2016, just before Trump came into office. Reading from the top, the State Department Diversity Officer John Robinson has just warned the staff that they may be penalized for engaging in microaggressions, which include jokes or other comments that someone who hears them may find offensive. Everyone knows where microaggression idea came from, the ever oppressive feminists in our culture. In a recent letter, he referred to a definition of microaggressions as everyday verbal, nonverbal, environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentional or unintentional, which communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to a target person. In other words, your regular everyday life. So, reading from the top, Lavrentiy Beria, Joseph Stalin's head of the NKVD, a predecessor of the KGB, was quoted as saying to Stalin, "You name the person and I will find the crime." The crime of microaggression has already been used to stifle and prosecute speech by those who have contrary views in several left-leaning universities, and now it is coming to the federal government. Now, this is before Trump came into power. Fortunately, we have Trump there to put a stop to this nonsense, I hope. And there is some evidence that it is coming to a halt with changes to, I believe, the Title IX respect to students' ability to defend themselves against charges. This came out this week. Reading from the top here, offensive speech is totally subjective, and making it a crime is incompatible with a free society. This is a rather long quote here, and I'm coming to the end of my allotted time for talking about this stuff. Let's see if we can get to the real jux of it here. Okay, this is a description of how the climate change lobbyists have increasingly become aggressive on attacks on freedom of speech. And the coronavirus folks have been doing the same thing, claiming that they're protecting us from misinformation. Let's carry on. Oh, there was one particular point here I did think was appropriate in here. George Mason University meteorologist, his fellow Shukla, was the lead signatory of the letter sent to the Presidency and Attorney General asking them to use RICO, this Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization Act laws, to prosecute corporations and other organizations that have knowingly deceived the American people about the risks of climate change. In other words, they're making it legal to question climate change, and they're making it serious punishment for it. Unfortunately, for Shukla, he paid himself and his wife $1.5 million from the government climate grants for part-time work. Other prominent global warming fear-mongers who are on the government teat have also called for war crimes trials and even the execution of some critics. Even Attorney General Loretta Lynch said last week she has looked at the possibility of pursuing civil actions against so-called climate change deniers. The message being, don't look to the Obama administration to protect free speech. And this is where attacks on free speech end up. They put you in prison, ultimately. If we don't oppose these things, they end up criminalizing them, and then it's a matter of who is the most charismatic to say what crime, what punishment you deserve, and it could be up to include hanging as far as I'm concerned. And that's the problem. Freedom of speech, you end your freedoms. As the police ask us to report on people, and here's what's going on in Great Britain. Snitching. As the police ask us to report people who are COVIDiots, would you squeal on a neighbor for flouting the rules? Well, this woman would. And she got printed in this UK magazine. Articles, the links in the description. And here's her quote. This is deadly serious, and the front line is the National Health Service and all who are fighting to save lives. They are begging us to stay home, and that is enough for me. Why should selfish individuals who think only of their own pleasure be allowed to get away with it? Would it be right to stand by? No. In these extraordinary circumstances, I firmly believe personal liberty is less important than the public good. And right there, folks, is your reason, our danger we're facing, is that the fear mongers who have whipped up incredible fear about this coronavirus around the world have convinced your neighbors to act as the police on your life. And they justify it to themselves in this manner. And the organizations like YouTube and Vimeo and Facebook are trying to shut anybody up who complains or offers a different view on it. In other words, censorship, so that people don't find out there's not really that much to fear. We've got to keep your neighbors afraid so they keep tabs on you. In these extraordinary circumstances, I firmly believe that personal liberty is less important than the public good. Just let that sink in. And that's coming from your neighbors. And here this one says, if you don't want your neighbors to snitch on you for going out during the coronavirus, by God, stay at home. Is anybody else just absolutely astounded by the public's response in this? The fear mongering has been successful. The real issue here, this article says, though, is some people's inability to follow the basic instruction to stay at home unless they need to go out. If people were not disregarding this advice, police would not have to enforce it. Incredible. But this is how we are regressing in our society as a result of this fear-mongering. I do despair over the attitude of those mindless idiots who are still having parties and getting drunk together. Then there are the twits going to DIY shops to buy paint, which is hardly essential. People, this is not an extended bank holiday. It is a lockdown. These are our co-citizens, and they're all ready to get the guns out, point them at you and send the KGB to haul you off. And all of that is facilitated by crushing our freedom of speech. Now, that's all I've got to say here on this matter today. So I am going to stop at this point and get Paul and Tom in with us to discuss this matter. Here is Paul Elam. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, good to be here.
Great to have you. And we were discussing backdrop information, specifically related to your reasons for leaving YouTube, and of course, your experience with Vimeo, which I understand was not very positive. And before I get there, I'm going to just introduce Tom in here as well. Tom Golden is one of your co-partners on Regarding Men. Tom, a long-acting activist for men's rights and a psychologist as well, I believe, right, Tom?
Psychotherapist, yeah.
Psychotherapist. Okay, I'm going to put the mic to Paul here and kick us off with your experience there, Paul.
Well, I guess what you're referring to, I mean, you were going over quite a bit of information, and it's all very disturbing. But to start off with, I mean, part of this for me goes back a few years ago to when I was declared a one-man hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. I don't know how I managed to pull that off, being a one-man group, but I was able to do it. And that has been used to censor my work in different places since then. We recently had the experience, it wasn't just me, it was with the videos that we had posted on a Regarding Men account for Vimeo. They picked a couple of titles that they didn't like and wrote and said, we're pulling the plug on this. Tom tried to reason with them about that and even offered to change a couple of titles to make it more in fitting with, allegedly, with their terms of service. They weren't interested in that either. They just wanted to kick us off of Regarding Men. And
what were the titles, Paul?
What were they, Tom?
Oh, gosh. One was How to Train Your Woman Like a Dog, I think.
Yes, How to Train Your Woman Like a Dog.
Another one was How to Deal with a Raging Bitch.
Yes, like How to Deal with a Raging Bitch.
They seem reasonable to me.
Some people will say, well, those are really offensive titles, but I'm like, give me a fucking break.
Well,
we've had titles out there about training men like dogs and calling men dogs for years and calling men's bastards and pricks and misogynistic and controlling and all sorts of negative characterization about men that has saturated our culture for the past 50 years. And they picked a couple of video titles that they found offensive and said that's the reason to pull the whole channel.
And the crazy thing was, Paul, that the titles were provocative, but the content itself was very tame. I mean, we were trying to help men to understand, how do you deal with someone who's really upset? We said, stay calm. You know, it was the basic message. And so it's like, you know, I said, look, just look at the content. Don't look at the title. Just look at the content. They didn't want any of it. They said, we're out of here. Yep. The other thing was, all of these videos were private. Nobody could see them. No one could see them.
That's interesting right there as well.
Public.
Yeah. Well, that was an operative at Vimeo. That wasn't something that they got a report on from anybody. That was some left-winger working at Vimeo, saw those titles and said, I'm going to go in and take it upon myself to act as the censor in this case. And that event is partly that, and combined with having all my YouTube videos demonetized. And they removed one about dealing with borderline personality disorders and called it hate speech and pulled it off of YouTube. And all I did, just for the record, so people know, my hate speech was me reading from the DSM-4. That's what that video was reading from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, straight from the psychologists, what their diagnostic criteria was for borderline personality, helping men understand this is what you look for when you're dealing with a high conflict individual. And that was regarded as hate speech.
So you should have read for 5.
Yes, I should have, apparently. But at any rate, this is what led to the decision for me why I'm only hosting promotional material on YouTube. For the Regarding Men discussions, I put out a 60-second promo. For anything else I do, I'll put a short promo on YouTube. Everything else I'm doing is going to BitChute. This is kind of an experiment. I want to see if it's possible to rebuild an audience away from these mega platforms that have gotten so oppressive in the way they operate and do business. And I hope we get time in this, Steve, to discuss a little more, as you were talking about toward the end, what's happening with these platforms and who they're attacking. I think some really bad stuff is coming.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Paul, what's your experience been so far about the BitChute transferring your viewership over there?
It's been positive. I mean, they haven't banned anything so far, and that's good. We will find out in the days ahead if they're serious about free speech there, because I will be testing the limits on that. I hope you can provide
not you.
Yes, me. And testing it in ways that I have not tested it before. And we're going to have plenty to talk about. It was one of the things you mentioned was that these platforms are basically, they're coming from the left, going after more right-leaning, freedom-oriented people. They're getting very, very Orwellian. I mean, they were Orwellian 5 years ago. Now they're getting just insane with this stuff. And I want to
Orwell a trick or two.
Yeah, I want to remind people too that this could possibly come down to a lot of civil unrest before it's over with. I think what they ought to do is to declare platforms like YouTube and others as utilities. You know, the phone is a utility. Nobody can tell you what to say on the phone. And I view these large social media platforms in the same way. They're more like public utilities. As a matter of fact, they reach as many homes just about as electricity does. It's amazing. So if you declare it a public utility, then you can apply constitutional protection to the speech there. But if we don't do that, if it comes down to them silencing everybody, I want to remind these sons of bitches that the people they're silencing are the people with the guns. And they need to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Because it could get serious at some point.
I think they're trying to make it serious.
People will only take so much. Right now, we got people in Michigan marching on the Capitol with their AR-15s. That is a serious message they're sending. And I support that message. This is, what did Thomas Jefferson say? He said that the tree of liberty must from time to time be replenished with the blood of tyrants and patriots. That's one of our founding fathers, and that was his worldview. And we see this in American spirit. People are now coming out of their homes and they're saying enough. And if the government doesn't get wise enough to intervene on this with things like declaring YouTube and other platforms as utilities, that's the way you prevent the violence, is to protect the free speech.
I like your utilities model. That would solve a lot of problems right off the bat.
It would. It would absolutely solve most of them. And of course,
it is. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it would be terrible for the tyrants at Google and other platforms who are very, very bent on silencing us now, and now the tyrants at Vimeo and other platforms. It's going to be a bad day for them when they can't control the content, but they're begging for this with their behavior, with their censorious behavior.
And using the coronavirus as an excuse right now to ratchet up all of these oppressive strategies.
And I don't see too many legislators who are jumping in there saying, oh, we need to do something about this. They're all sitting on their hands, you know, and they're allowing this propaganda to just be spewed out. And it's creating a situation where you've got two camps that are going to come to blows eventually, you know, because the mainstream media is just pushing this narrative that's unbelievably wrong. I mean, it's just wrong. And people are believing it because there's no alternative. You know, there's very little alternative. So, I mean, we're in deep trouble.
You saw that last little bit, the article by the woman who was saying, yes, we've got to censor, we've got to snitch on our neighbors.
Right.
The fear, they've ratcheted up. This is a big concern of mine.
Yes.
We've got 95 or plus % of the people, I think, around the world are terrified of this virus. You've got a small group of people who see the perspective here. For instance, more than 1 million people died in the US or globally for the H3N2, I think it was, in 1969, where the Woodstock, not one, it's a very similar kind of viral pandemic.
Right.
No quarantine. Woodstock went on. It killed about 1 million people, and there wasn't all this outbreak. And there's a bunch of these, like the H1N1 was another one. Now, all of a sudden, they're set the model up that they've got the public, 4.4 billion people around the world subject to quarantine. They've got people trained to accept this, and they've got neighbors trained to squeal on their friends and neighbors who don't lock themselves in.
They've got everybody in fear.
What's your psychologist response to how they did this and what's going on here?
Very, very methodical. I mean, it's just incredible how it's been going on for 50 years. And feminism is one part of that. I mean, if you look at feminism, it's the same crap. They push a narrative over and over again. They only tell you half the truth. They leave out the other half. And it's
narrative of fear, right? Narrative.
And now they're pushing this fear thing, which basically paralyzes people who are not, how would you say it? Who aren't like Paul Elam, I mean, most people are going to get afraid. Oh no, the virus, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, this is like the flu almost. It's a little worse than the flu, but you don't shut down a whole freaking country because of the flu.
The whole world.
Oh my gosh, this is crazy. It's insane.
And they are actively making sure that sane voices don't emerge. And that even in the Trump administration, which I admire a great deal, there is kowtowing to this narrative. Yep. It is apparent at this point that what they could have done to deal with this pandemic was to suggest that people over 62 or 65 shelter in place. And then you look at the actual death rates for younger people, which are microscopic. They are absolutely microscopic.
Right.
We could have handled this much differently.
Yep.
But there's something nefarious at play here.
Yes.
They're testing the waters on all this stuff. And then when people point out, hey, the death rate, the mortality rate for people under 60 is like 0.01%. Why are we having everybody on lockdown? Pull the plug on that. Don't let people talk about that. Because the more people talk about that, the more people are going to start pushing for their rights again.
I hope so.
And I live in one of the most restrictive states right now. Virginia is officially locked down until June the 10th. They put an arbitrary date on it way in the future that makes absolutely no sense. So here I am, still getting groceries curbside. Still all the restaurants, all that stuff is closed. Nobody can go out and eat. And Ralph Northam seems to love it that way.
He gets to practice totalitarianism.
Yes, he did, which is what the left wants more than anything else.
I know, it's bizarre.
Want absolute control. And buddy, don't think for a moment that when this pandemic is over, that life in terms of our freedoms will be back to the same as they were.
Exactly.
I just threw this image up here as you were talking. It's put it to me, Paul. This is a military-style assault vehicle, armored, and this was used against citizens who had reopened a pub legally, and some who protesting the virus. This is in Texas. This is the police force in Ector County Sheriff, Texas. That's what they're training the people to get accustomed to right there.
Yep, there it is, totalitarianism.
Well, if you want to try to suppress the people in Texas, you better have some fucking equipment like that.
That's true. And that brings up a point. Like I think the U.S. is a unique country in the world. It's the only country I know of in the world where all of the citizens, you can almost count on, well, except the lefties who are trying to destroy the country. The rest of them all have guns, and they know how to use them, and they're prepared to protect their civil liberties.
Amen.
There's no other country in the world like that.
That's
that
right.
I know
It
of.
goes back to our, that mentality goes back, and why you see such a difference in mentality toward government between the U.S. and Canada. The U.S. chose rebellion against the crown, and it was out of that rebellion and winning a decisive war against the greatest military power on earth that instilled in Americans a sort of pioneering spirit of independence, and it carries through to this day.
Yes.
We don't bow to authority. And luckily, I mean, I've just heard on the news, the hairdresser in Texas who was thrown in jail for 7 days because she wouldn't apologize to a leftist judge and bow and scrape. Well, the Texas Supreme Court just let her out.
All right.
Oh, cool.
They just ordered her release today.
And I think she's the one they got $500,000 for on the GoFundMe.
Yes. And I think, look, I'm a men's advocate. Give her the damn money.
Yeah,
she
really.
stood up to the powers to be and told them, you can't have your fucking apology.
Yes.
Wow,
I'm
that's
not
great to hear.
But
I'll tell you what, Paul, if it was a man who did the same thing she did, he wouldn't have gotten $500K.
Yep. No.
Ain't no way, Jose.
Hey, yeah. And people would have said, what an idiot. You should have apologized. Sad to say, gender issues are still what they are.
Oh man, and they're going to stay that
going
way.
Anyway anytime soon.
They're going to stay that way, but men are good.
I admire that woman. I admire her.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Gotta love her.
And we need more people doing that because something? Rights are not given to you by a government. It's in our Constitution that we believe, even supposed atheists, I guess, that our rights are bestowed divinely, that they're an innate part of who we are.
Yes.
In the reality, and by American history, we learn this, our rights are the rights we take.
Yes.
Not rights that we're given.
Exactly.
This is not the government. Yeah. I don't owe my government a bit of allegiance. If they get in the way of my rights, I got a right to defy them.
Yes.
And that's written into my Constitution. It's why we have a Second Amendment. People think it's so that people have the right to defend themselves. Bullshit. We have a Second Amendment because the armed citizenry should and does terrify an oppressive government. They should be afraid of us. That's why we have a Second Amendment. It's why our forefathers wanted us to have a Second Amendment, so the government would be afraid to practice tyranny.
And that's why they get those big armed vehicles.
Absolutely right.
Would you say that government power has, I think I know the answer to this, but you guys can comment on this, that government power has grown too strong over our lifetimes? Let's just conserve, just from the time of our birth, we're all about the same age. You think it's gone excessive in our lifetime?
Absolutely. Oh my God, I'm in a state that's locked down.
Yeah.
Talk about excessive.
Death by progressivism.
Yeah. I can't leave my home unless it's to get food. That's what the ruling says now.
Yeah, it's
crazy.
By the way,
I don't care what anybody says. These are not fucking laws. Laws are passed by legislatures and signed into law. These are executive orders. You cannot issue laws by edict from government mansions. It is not legal. That woman who was initially thrown in jail in Dallas for breaking a law, she hadn't broke any law. That judge had no authority to issue a restraining order.
Really? What a jackass.
There is no law.
What are the repercussions to that judge? Can there be any?
Political.
He's elected. He has to be elected every year, or
yeah, he's up for election, I think.
Yeah, some judges are appointed and some are elected, and I think this is an elected judge.
Yes.
And of course, Dallas, Tarrant County, Texas, which I know very well, is as blue as anything on the eastern seaboard.
Yeah.
So his chances of re-election probably went up because what the left wants is a nice, strong daddy government to tell everybody how to live, especially when they're telling people to live by their rules.
Thank you, feminism.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, thank you, feminism.
Exactly.
Thank you, feminism, for attacking our presumption of innocence, our freedom of speech.
Amen.
Amen.
Wow.
Hmm.
So where are you going to publish regarding men now?
At regardingmen.com.
Oh, is it streamed directly, hosted directly from regardingmen.com?
No, but I'll be putting it up on my channel, Men Are Good, and Paul will be putting it on BitChute, and I think you and Janice will be putting it on Brule,
On
right?
YouTube, yeah. And
So,
Studio Brule, yeah.
It'll be out there.
And there also will be embedded at regardingmen.com.
Yes.
For those of you who have problems with YouTube giving you notifications, like they are, YouTube is really bad about making sure that conservative notifications don't go out. You can sign up for the newsletter and for notifications at regardingmen.com,
Yes.
and you will actually get a notification every
Yes.
time the video comes out.
Awesome. So let me put this question out for, we've got a few more minutes, or do you have a few more minutes?
I got about 5.
Okay.
I have to go at the top.
I'll do this quickly. We quickly touched on there's got to be some motive force, let's call it a conspiracy theory, around why they're pushing this quarantine response to the coronavirus and where this coronavirus come from. Give me your opinions on it.
I think they're testing the population to see how much they can get away with.
Do you think it was deliberate release?
I'm hesitant to say that. I think at the end, I'm an Occam's razor guy. I believe that probably what happened here was that it was an inadvertent release, and that the powers that be thought, hey, why waste a good crisis? Let's test our powers, see how much we can actually control the population, see what we can get away with before they start getting their guns out. And that makes sense to me. Of course, I wouldn't rule out anything because, we learn from history about governments not to trust them.
Yeah.
Our conspiracies usually aren't strong enough when it comes to suspecting government.
When it comes to the truth, you better believe it. Our history is not good.
In the last 3 years, we see how conspiracy theories have become fact again, and again.
Yeah. So you think it's opportunistic use of this accidental release?
Yeah, they say it out loud. The Democrats say that never let a crisis go to waste.
Yes, as a matter of fact, the Democrats got on the in the floor of our House of Representatives, and I forgot which one it was. They're all generic idiots, so it doesn't matter. One of them popped up and said, we should use this as an opportunity to further our agenda.
And that's what they've been doing.
Shape our vision of this country. It wasn't about saving lives. It wasn't about finding cures. It wasn't about keeping people safe. It wasn't about any of that. It was, here's an opportunity to practice Orwellian control on the level that we would really like to.
Yes.
And look how quickly these YouTubes and these social medias organizations jumped on the opportunity to clamp down on the speech of people they don't like or don't agree with.
Absolutely.
Yep.
There's a lot of opportunism going on.
And a lot of synergy between these large platforms and the government, I'm sorry to say. I mean, the government if Donald Trump right now could do devastating damage to Twitter by moving to Gab. Millions and millions of people would follow him there. They would start having on mainstream media, they would start having to say he gabbed out today instead of tweeted. And it would create a devastating problem for Twitter, and it would put Gab on the map, a free speech platform for millions more people. And it just amazes me. It's the one thing, I mean, there's a lot I love about Trump, but strategically, I don't know why he didn't move to Gab 2 years ago, because he's aware of the problem.
Yeah, he actually tweets about the very problem you're talking about there.
Yeah, but he should be gabbing it. He really should. He should just move. And all
maybe we should take that up too.
There, it would be beautiful. One guy could change that.
Yeah, really.
Okay, so we're up on our time here, and I know you guys both had mentioned that you've got a 3 o'clock deadline. So I'm going to wrap this up quickly with asking the folks in the viewership, do let us know what you think about moving to BitChute and Gab and these kinds of things. Would you follow us all there? if we make a move and abandon YouTube, using YouTube merely as an advertising platform for the core material on other platforms. Thank you both for joining me. Terrific. I hope you guys come on again. Will you?
I would love to.
Yeah, man.
Awesome. Awesome.
It's good.
So I like to remind everybody before I say goodbye, do something you love every single day. This is no exception. And if you don't have something you love, find something you love, because it's the best thing for your mental health. Every single day, without exception, do something you love today. And thanks once again, guys. We'll catch again soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
We'll see you.
Ciao.